Welcome, everyone, to another one of Roundtable Writers' workshops. I'm really excited by this one, led by Katrina and Dan on dialogue. They've done an amazing job. The workshop that we have coming up here is going to be a real treat and something that I think people are going to be able to take a lot away from for probably years to come. So this is a momentous moment in time. All right.
No.
just a little. All right. Without any further ado, we have Dan McMinn and Katrina Ray-Saulis here to lead our workshop on dialogue.
Great. Everybody see our green Pac-Man and yellow brick man, whatever that is? Got it? All right. Okay, so welcome to this presentation. Glad you can make it. Wanted to talk a little bit about dialogue today. It's been fun. It was an excuse for me to go picking around it myself and picking Katrina's brain. It's something I always try to work on more myself. Our plan for today depends a little bit on time. Since we're a little cozy group, we may get through things pretty fast, but we planned to start with a discussion of the basic mechanics, because sometimes that gets glossed over, moving on to the more sophisticated stuff. So at least get that out of the way first. And then I have a little exercise that Odin has put up in the documents for this presentation that he'll tell you how to get it. And then we're going to talk about beats, specifically the little bits of action that interrupt dialogue in fiction, and then another exercise to show you basically how those beats interact with the dialogue itself. And then Katrina's going to talk about cadence and establishing the sort of rhythm and meter, almost like song to your dialogue. And then together we're going to wrap it up talking about the higher level things, how to get your dialogue not to just state baldly so that everybody is a little robot repeating their emotions, but how speech is angled towards their intentions, as Raymond Carver said. And one last exercise based on that. So starting off with the mechanics, you have the basic mechanics of dialogue, which are that you can put the speaker, you can of course use no dialogue tag, but you can also put the speaker first, which honestly should rarely have to do. The only reason I can think of that you might want to put the speaker first, saying something like Delia Sherman said, every conversation is no negotiation, rather than later in the sentence, is if there's a high probability that the reader will have no idea who's speaking. And then you put the name in first because otherwise they'll be completely lost until they get to that speech tag. But usually they should have at least some clue. And so more likely, if it's a longer sentence, you'll find the speaker somewhere in the middle, wherever there's a convenient break. So no word, Mark Twain said, was ever as effective as a rightly timed pause. And finally, the last position you can put it is at the end. And especially for short sentences, this is probably the most common. This should be your default. To have your bit of dialogue, short bit of dialogue. Dialogue is how characters avoid communicating their intentions, said someone. And you can either say said Fred or Fred said. Both work so long as you do it consistently, and not mix it up back and forth, because people will notice that and distract. Katrina, you want to talk about the more complicated kinds of dialogue?
Sure. So Wait a second, we're on that one. Okay, so I have two screens going on. So if I'm not looking right at you, it's because I'm looking at the PowerPoint on a different screen. So there's different kinds of dialogue as far as lowercasing on the second half of a sentence. So if you split your sentence in half, split your dialogue in half, as you can see, like, sorry, Delia Sherman said every conversation is a negotiation. Where that's lowercase, that would mean that it's the second half of something else that presumably she said. Don't give your main character all your best lines, someone shouted, using exclamation points and question marks, of course. Alfred Hitchcock really said, when the script is finished, then we add the dialogue with the question mark after the quotation. If the question mark is part of the quotation, like if that was a question Alfred Hitchcock is asking, you want the question mark inside the quotations. Whereas if the question is, did Alfred Hitchcock say this? Then the quote is part of that question. And then nested quotes. A friend said, I heard Bill Watterson created Calvin and Hobbes because a funny dialogue is funnier than a funny monologue, which is funny, right? The question mark is in the quotes in that one, because it's part of the quote, right? I'll go to the next one.
Okay, there we go. And another thing is a big rule for me, and it's something that I messed up a lot, and then I started taking some theater classes, and I learned, oh, pretty much every time I write dialogue, cutting it down from 4 lines helps. And it really, once you start looking at your dialogue to see if any of the lines are longer than 3 lines, you'll notice, oh yeah, people don't sort of yield the floor to one speaker for that many lines in a row. And I became this real martinet about always making sure every line of dialogue is 3 lines or fewer. But then I talked to Katrina a little bit.
But I contradict that. I contradict that because I'm going to talk about this a little bit more later when we talk about Aaron Sorkin too. But although in normal conversation, most people don't yield the floor for that many lines of dialogue, you can find sometimes that it's actually important to a character to do that. If I were to write, for instance, my sister or my sister-in-law as fictional characters, both of them definitely force others to yield the floor for more than 4 lines of dialogue. They're both extremely long-winded people who love to hear the sound of their own voices. And I so often, whenever I do these things, I do this with my students too that I teach. I pull from whatever I'm currently reading or whatever I'm currently watching, which is going to happen throughout this. I just finished this book, which is on our next slide, I think. Is this our next slide? Or is it a couple slides? Yeah, it's this one. Okay. The Beach Street Knitting Society and Yarn Club. I don't know if I'd recommend it unless you're like a complete knitting nerd like me, because I think I'm the only person on the planet that would really love this book. But I did. But there's a character in this book who, the grandmother, who speaks in very long lines, many sentences in a row, often asks 3 or 4 questions in a row without actually expecting an answer to any of them. And it's very important to her character development and to the way that she interacts with other characters. As you can see here, the first line there, we're at the seaside, that's her grandson, who's very young. Or no, great-grandson. He'd be her great-grandson. And he's like 5. And then the whole big long thing in green there, that's Gran, babbling and babbling and babbling. And then the last line is her granddaughter, who's the little boy's mother. What? Sorry, Gran, no, I haven't. This says so much to me about this character. And literally to find this quote, like I was thinking of which quote to use for this, and I probably could have picked any quote from this character in the book because it's very rare for her to use anything less than a full paragraph of speech ever. And other people react that way to her every time. What? Like, you lost me. I wasn't even listening because you talked for so long, right? And it's so important to her character.
So having done that, I thought it would be fun to try to get at some of the basics of dialogue by giving you the worst possible dialogue I could invent. Basically, I tried to all of those rules of creating good dialogue. I tried to break them one by one. I think I broke pretty much all of the ones here on this bulleted list. And so I thought it might be fun as a challenge for the next 8 minutes or so. If you could, Odin, if you could jump on, how do they access the Word documents?
Yeah, so for anyone who is going to be doing this, just pop back into the text channel and you'll see that I posted, I'm going to pin them as well, a couple of Word documents. You can use those to access the access this exercise.
And let us know when you get that document. And there'll be another document for later, but let us know when you have that so that we know that you have that.
Deliberately terrible dialogue.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. If anybody has any problems accessing them, just let us know in text chat and I'll take care of it.
And so for the next 8 minutes or so, if you just bring that up, the terrible dialogue, and just try to fix as much as you can. It's going to be like hacking through jungle with a machete, but make any changes you think would make the scene stronger, even if it might change it in some ways or cuts it incredibly, or changes a character. There's something that would make this a less horrible dialogue, and see if you have any fun with that.
Now I'm going to go off and start a ritual of darkest portent whereby I extract your shriveled soul from out your body and sacrifice it to the great Lord Baal. Dude. That sentence.
I don't think that needs fixing. That's fine.
It's a work of art.
I've gotten in 2 paragraphs deep. This is dense. Densely layered.
This is fun, trying to undo all the things that I did. Shout out to my friend Shweta, who helped me make it so much worse. It was an interesting challenge. That to start off bad and try to figure out if you could make it worse. It's like no more repetition, more. The prose isn't quite purple enough. It's only like mildly lavender. So Catherine, Lucas, what did you come up with? Was there any changes that you felt like, gosh, I fixed something really horrible with this, or it was really nice to cut out this whole paragraph? Or
well, now that I've deleted it, I can't quite remember what I did.
Oh, right.
I there are a lot of like you said, like the sort of 4-line plus chunks of them just sort of repeating themselves, and I would just cut
Right.
that. I'm like, well,
Yeah.
what would make them actually, like talk at each other repeatedly without letting the other sort of respond?
Right.
Strangely validating because it was so easy to just go through bit by bit and go, no, bad, change this, change this, change this. And so then it makes me feel like I'm really good at dialogue, even though I'm not.
But that's what it is. Like it's also especially easy when you're looking at someone else's mistakes, and especially when the mistakes are so clear. But it doesn't. If it just goes in, I talk a little bit later about scaffolding draft. If you think about your early dialogue as scaffolding or as having scaffolding, then you can put in like way too many dialogue tags and put in an adverb for every single line of dialogue, all these things that people tell you not to do. But on a first draft, it can give you a hint as to, you're writing along and then he said sadly. I love this day. He said sadly. Why did he say sadly? And that can be the thing that gets you into the scene more. Or if you never let a dialogue tag go by without someone picking up a glass or something like that, eventually your brain's going to start bringing in more stuff from the scene, and you'll start seeing the scene through the dialogue as well. So if you start writing stuff like that that's as easy to edit as this, sometimes it can be helpful because we all know how to get rid of stuff, and it's a lot easier to get rid of stuff once you put it in. But those things can act like scaffolding to help you build a little higher in earlier drafts. What changes specifically, Catherine, did you find that you liked making or were enjoyable?
So I made some contractions like I'll instead of I will. I took out a bunch of the likes because I think one here and there is plenty.
Right.
Definitely took out some of the info dumps, making the assumption that like the whole backstory about Hashley and why Hashley was called that should have been given to us at an earlier point in the story.
Right.
Some punctuation things, adding their names at the beginning instead of he and she, so that we'd know to start with who is talking. Those are some things that come to mind.
Right. Yeah, the contractions are a big one. People don't speak like that. Everybody getting their full lines in, and yes, you don't info dump in the middle of dialogue. Yes, about introducing who they are. Yes, Katrina was pointing this out. There's the only people in the thing who you don't know the names of are the two people who are talking. And so using that, that segues us nicely actually into talking about beats. So Katrina and I had a long discussion because there are other definitions of beats. There's the beats that are the rhythm and cadence, which she's going to be talking about very soon. There's beats, which are the kinds of things you do in a beat sheet for a screenplay. And so you who have done some screenplay writing, it's basically like an emotional section of a story. For movies, because they have to be right about an hour and 30 minutes, some people get very detailed in that this beat, which is the setup, which leads to the moment of no return, has to be this many minutes. And so that's a different kind of beats. What I'm talking about here, maybe it's only my personal definition, is I'm talking about both the dialogue tags and the short segments of exposition that break up the dialogue, but aren't so long that I would say, well, this is a dialogue segment and then exposition, like a big paragraph of exposition and then more dialogue. It's more like, gosh, I'm thirsty, he said, and then picked up a glass of water, right? There's a little bit of exposition there, but it's mostly helping along the dialogue. So, this is my diagram that I love so much. So if you're trying to sort of look at a diagram of how concentrated and meaningful speech is, at the very top, the most watered down, useless, soul-crushing sometimes kind of speech is those kinds of scripted pleasantries, I call them. So they're walking down the street and say, isn't it a nice day today? How are, gosh, I see your lawn's growing nicely. The kinds of things that you would say to someone who you didn't really care about. The kinds of things that Americans do, this thing where we ask, how are you doing? With no explanation, no expectation that everyone's actually going to tell you how they're doing. Because they're just going to tell you, fine, you have acknowledged my existence. So actually the script it's so scripted in that the actual words have no meaning. Right? You are fine, it has nothing to do with how are you. And then next down you go to friendly chatting, which for each 2 words of speech, I would say you're getting about 1 word with a meaning. So you're actually talking with a friend and friendly, and you actually care about them a little bit, but it's still not that meaningful. And then an actual meaningful conversation is one where each word has meaning, but that's still not good for your fiction. Not good enough for your fiction. Fictional dialogue has to at least get 2 words of meaning for each word that's in there, I would say. You have to have it really concentrated down, and it must appear and sound as if it's normal speech, but it must be much more concentrated than that. Stage dialogue even more, because they don't have the budgets of screenplays and fiction, where we have infinite budgets on special effects. So they have to lean even more into excellent dialogue. And then poetry, well, I mean, it's not as much as dialogue, but it has to be even more concentrated. And so, and the question becomes, how do you concentrate dialogue? And one of the ways to do that is with those beats we talked about. And so beats come also from acting, and it's the things that the actors are doing while they're speaking their lines. Again, one of the definitions. And they can do a lot of things, and they can do a lot of things in fiction as well. One of them is, I call it emoting. That's in acting, one of the things they say is it's a term of disparagement called indicating. And indicating is when the actor has a line of dialogue, is like, "I hate you," he said angrily. And so they say, "I hate you," with big exclamation points, which is the first way you would think to emote something, right? Whereas a much better way to do it is to think, well, how would this character say it? Would they say, "I hate you," or would they say, "I hate you"? Right? Like how would the person speak? With big and loud, or small and quiet? In your beats in fiction, wait, gotta go back. You can do the same thing, and it's best to pick the subtler choices or the less expected choices. Those beats, those little bits of exposition around your dialogue, is also where you can foreground, meaning pull the objects out of your background, so you're not just against a backdrop, but your characters are interacting with the scene, picking things up, going over, touching things, moving around things. And the last is about pace setting, is that the way if you put in a little beat of dialogue, a beat in the middle of your dialogue, that can give your characters time to pause and think about something, for example. And this is going to come up, Katrina is going to talk a lot more about this, so I'll just leave that at that. So I'd like to give you just a minute. How are we doing for time? Oh, a little bit behind. Going to give you just a minute to read through this little bit of dialogue from Hills Like White Elephants. And we're going to look at this twice, so it's worth reading through. And I'm just going to call out some of the mechanistic things and the beats here. Just take a look at them. Oh, yeah. First thing I'm calling out is, so this is Hemingway, so it's all pretty simple, so it makes for good examples. He's got short sentences, so sentence, the man said. Sentence, the girl said. Sentence, the man said. For the slightly longer one, it's the man said, and then it continues. So it's in the middle at the first major break. And this basically how you should probably do it most of the time. This is a good baseline strategy for the mechanics that you should deviate from with intent. And here's a couple of those beats. His beats here are really simple. You can get a lot more Baroque about the beats if you want, but what these beats do is they allow this guy is trying to, if you're not familiar with the piece, the man in this story, it's a very simple story observed by some bystander, it seems like, of this couple waiting at a train station. And up until this point, all of the things they've said have been things like, the beer's nice and cool, it's lovely. And then this guy starts talking about an operation, an abortion, basically. And these beats allow there to be him say a thing, and then there be the feeling of a pause before his next line, and a feeling of another pause before the next line. So you know it's not just him giving one long speech, but him saying a thing, seeing that she doesn't respond, and then moving on. So that's working on the pacing there. And then once you get into a rhythm, you can usually drop the dialogue tags. Here, a thing, I don't know if this affects you very often as writers, but one thing I often see is that if someone is getting cut off, you want to end their dialogue with an M dash like this. That's when someone's getting interrupted. Some people try to put ellipses in those. Ellipses are for when a person sort of trails off and there's a pause. But you might look at any ellipsis that wants to move into your story and think to yourself, is there a beat I could put in here? Because if you use a beat, you get the same pause, but you also can do double duty in that it can bring in the background, it can show a little emotion. So it's a more flavorful kind of ellipsis. So really do think twice before you use an ellipsis. And then, so this whole speech, he's kept talking about her, everything will be fine, everything will be fine, everything will be fine, until she's like going out of her mind because clearly everything's not going to be fine. And so this last beat is a particularly long one. And she has just said, will you please, please, please stop talking about, you know, how fine I'm going to be. And you know, this is just this longish for Hemingway moment where you know he's going to ask again. He's going to ask one more time. And oh, God damn it, man, don't ask that question. And then in the next one, he asks it, and she's like, I'm going to scream. And you sort of, as a reader, also feel like, yeah, maybe I'd scream if he kept poking at this thing over and over and over again. And so that's, oh, and then again, he said in the middle, because it's a slightly longer, I'll scream, the girl said at the end. So, Katrina, I think I've gone a little bit over, so we'll do this as a case study instead of an exercise, I think. Yeah. So I have this other exercise. If you just open the other document you got, do you have that, Lucas, Catherine? You have
So that
one?
should be pinned in the text channel next to the previous exercise. If you can't find it, just let me know in the text channel and I'll reshare.
It's above it. Okay. All righty then.
And pretty soon, Katrina's going to get to chat with you about Aaron Sorkin, whom she loves and is an awesome, awesome writer, guru, great high Pumbaa of dialogue, and a person I love almost as much as she loves Aaron Sorkin is Terry Pratchett. And I thought he would be a great guy to look at his beats, because Terry Pratchett writes with a slightly old-fashioned, a little bit more omniscient narration voice, with a whole lot of, very similarly to Douglas Adams, a whole lot of narrative content to it. And so if you take out the beats, from Terry Pratchett, it changes things a lot because he's getting a lot in his beats, and so you can change the tone of this of the work a lot by pulling them back out. So, do people have this document open here? Okay, I'm not going to try to stop sharing the presentation and share my document. So you're going to have to follow along that way because I'll break it if I try that. So what you can do is if you go to the top of Word and click the Review tab. And click the Review tab. And then go over to the Changes section and click Reject All Changes. And then a bunch of red text will come up, right? So then undo that so we can go back. And then this way you can flip back and forth between it with the beats, what I call the beats, that additional stuff, and it without. So let's see, which one would be the juiciest? Let's go. Well, let's try reading the first one. So this first one takes place when one of his main characters, Carrot, is going to go off to the big city and join the Night Watch. And Pratchett is a humor writer. So this is the scene in which a friend of his family, who had suggested he go and become a man in the Watch, is giving him his grandfather's protection. Protection against of vital organs, a piece of armor. And the first line is, or should I have other folks read it? Hey, Odin, would you read one of the lines for me?
Yeah, let me pop in and read that. Let me pull that up here. All right,
Okay,
so
and
I'll
yeah,
do the first one.
yeah. Lucas, would you do the alternating lines with Odin?
Okay.
Okay.
This belonged to my great-grandfather.
Is it some sort of sling? A cod piece, like in fish.
No, it's for the fighting. You should wear it all the time. Protects your vitals, like...
It's a bit small, Mr. Venetia.
That's because you don't wear it on your head. You see, my great-granddad used to say that, but for this, I wouldn't be here today.
What did he mean by that?
I've no idea.
Aha. And so if you put the beats back in, you get things like how Carrot looks at this thing. He examines it in polite silence and he looks at it mystified. And then down here at the bottom, so Carrot tries it on. And this is really important. When we had the dialogue, he was just holding it up, and you had no indication that he was actually putting it on his head. But it is far funnier when he takes this cod piece and puts it on his head than if he's just in the abstract holding it up in front and talking with someone, right? So this is where a beat, a small bit of beat interacting with the object makes this substantially more funny. And then right there at the end, he says that but for this metal armored codpiece, I wouldn't exist today, right? So somebody tried to stab him in the groin. And of course, Carrot is such an innocent that he says, what did he mean by that? And there are many ways you could say, I have no idea. Odin said it as if he actually had no idea, but the beat there is that Varneshi's mouth opened and shut a few times. I've no idea, he said spinelessly. And I would use this spinelessly as a good example for anybody who says, oh, you should never use adverb, because this spinelessly is what makes this particular line. But this guy has wimped out, and this is Pratchett coming in here and giving you just this little bit of joke. It's not going to be the biggest laugh in the whole book, but I guarantee you, if you have pages and pages of stuff with a little bit here and a little bit there, by the end of chapters, you'll be laughing. I've taken a lot of time on that, but I warmly encourage you, down at the end, if you look down below the last couple of headings, there's the Assassin's Guild leader speaks with the city governor, the patrician, and the night watch captain speaks with the city governor. And both of them have these fairly straightforward dialogue segments where someone is trying to, there's the patrician, who's basically the city governor. And both of these people are trying to argue with him and get mad at him. And they have fairly angry dialogue. And the beats reveal how afraid they all are of that patrician. And so you can see how the dialogue and the beats are playing a little bit counter to each other, and thus reinforcing each other. And I have taken plenty of time on that, so go get to that when you get a chance. And if you could jump back on the slides with me, we're on cadence. And I'm going to turn it over
why
to
Aaron Sorkin is awesome.
Yes.
Why every presentation I give on dialogue, I end up talking about Aaron Sorkin. So, and this is not I really do. I had heard this first on a podcast, and I was trying to find the podcast episode, and I don't know which one it was. I'd heard Lin-Manuel Miranda talking about how he was inspired to write Hamilton. Oh, I should preface this by saying, the reason I'm doing this section and not the last section is because 95% of what I write is dialogue, because I write scripts. So I study the things that the characters say. I'm not a script writer who includes a lot of action. I tend to leave that up to the director. Maybe that's because my first love of theater was Shakespeare, and if you've ever read Shakespeare, there's barely any, really the only action you get is Romeo exits, or somebody dies. So so I heard on this podcast, I heard Lin-Manuel Miranda talking about how he was inspired by Aaron Sorkin because Aaron Sorkin writes dialogue like a musician. And being a huge West Wing fan, I started listening for that in the dialogue. And not only does he write dialogue like a musician, there are scenes of the West Wing, particularly the walk and talks, where I feel which is if you know the West Wing, it's a very common thing for the camera to be following people while they're talking and walking, which was West Wing was one of the first to do that. I feel like I could imagine a director standing in front of an orchestra, and one character is the brass section, and one character is the woodwinds, and one character is the piccolo that only comes in moments here and there, and probably that character's Kristen Chenoweth just because of her high-pitched voice. But he writes his dialogue like music, and it has a cadence to it, and no matter which character is speaking, and the way characters speak to each other carries that cadence. So if you want to go to the next one there, Dan. Ainsley Hayes, not my favorite character, and yet I'm always referencing her when I do dialogue presentations. This was just a really good example of that cadence. Say they are smug and superior. Say their approach to public policy makes you want to tear your hair out. Say they like high taxes and spending your money. Say they want to take your guns and open your borders, but don't call them worthless. At least don't do it in front of me. The people I have met have been extraordinarily qualified. Their intent is good. Their commitment is true. They are righteous and they are patriots, and I'm their lawyer. So Ainsley Hayes is the only Republican working in a Democratic White House on the show. This is her defending the White House because one of her Republican friends is saying horrible things about the Democrats, and she's saying okay, you can say that you disagree with them on all these things, but the thing that I noticed first, the repetition of the word "say" and how musical that is to go. Say they are smug and superior. And then if you listen to the cadence of that, say they are smug and superior, say their approach to public policy makes you want to tear your hair out. There's a beat to it. Now, Ainsley Hayes is maybe too easy because she's a character that actually speaks in iambic pentameter, and it's pointed out by other characters that she does this. So she makes it a really easy example of cadence in dialogue, but it is something that Aaron Sorkin does all over the place. And I would definitely not say that I'm using this in my writing yet, but I would say that it's something I'm noticing and paying a lot of attention to, so I wanted to talk about it. So if you go to the last one there on this section, you can see that repetition of say, they are smug and superior. Actually, you know what, Dan? Go back one. Sorry. The other thing I want to point out is the way that he punctuates the dialogue at the end is like that final beat of music. And this happens if you watch The West Wing, if you watch any of his stuff, really. An American President, I can think of a couple scenes too. There's that moment of finality in scenes that it does sound like that final beat at the end of a song. They're righteous in their pits. Now, granted, Ainsley's obviously giving a little mini speech here, but even still, that ending of "and I'm their lawyer," like you can hear that final beat of music in that after all of these longer sentences, this kind of tempo, and then just one last beat of the drum, right? And it's such a fascinating thing to me. I feel like if we look back through script writing, like if I look at Shakespeare, of course, we know had a lot of musicality in the way he wrote. He wrote like a poet, obviously. And then we have things like The West Wing that are doing that today, and Hamilton that are doing that today. You could set any of these to music. You could set them to music and it would work. And I find that really interesting in dialogue, that we can tell a story that way and have our characters speak that way, and not in a way that would work in actual speech. Like, I don't see us walking around speaking in this musical tone unless you actually are Lin-Manuel Miranda. I don't see you doing that. But I find it fascinating that we can get away with it. Not only get away with it in a character, but in fiction, it can be comforting. The West Wing is a show that I will put on in the background while I'm working on something else, because it's like music. It's like background music because of that cadence and that dialogue, the way that the dialogue's written that way.
So in this last section, Katrina, you'll also be jumping in. Feel free to cut me off when you want. So we talked about mechanics. We talked about the beats, so like getting pieces in. We talked about the musicality and the cadence. And then now we've sort of gotten to the higher level stuff, which is the emotions behind all of these more technical level tricks and tactics. And that was, if you remember the awful sample, all those things that weren't there. Everything that people said was right on the nose. They would say, "I feel very terrible right now," which is, people just don't come out and say their exact mental state now.
The thing I was thinking about with that example, with the bad dialogue example, was the fact that he says we're breaking up. And I kind of got caught on that line because I started thinking about it and thinking, I feel like the question, are we breaking up, is far more common than the statement, we are breaking up. Right. In characters and in real life, I feel like that's just not how people break up. Like, it's more of a, are we breaking up? Oh shit, I think we are, than it is like...
Yeah, that was the first thing I changed, was him sort of like sidling up to the thing and her saying, wait a second, as opposed to him just baldly stating it. Mm-hmm. Another Sorkin quote from his masterclass was he starts it with, intention and obstacle. The thing you need for good dialogue and good story is people have to have intentions and there has to be obstacles to them getting it. And also, had to include this, dialogue, everybody knows in bad dialogue, very often, everybody fully understands what the other person is saying and what they mean. There's no, wait, what did that guy just say? Is like, I have heard you. Were you talking about this? Those are very common in actual speech. But since you are the writer, you have perfect omniscient knowledge. Even if you do not have an omniscient narrator, it's really easy to accidentally have all of your characters rock everything that's being said to them. Whereas oftentimes it looks much more like these little old guys who each is hearing a different thing and saying a different thing to the ones around them. Let's see.
I think that's really that little thing. Not only are they obviously not hearing what each other are saying in that, because like one thinks the other one's saying thirsty and he's saying Thursday, but also like if you listen to the way people talk, they rarely directly answer each other too. It's very common for somebody to say something and the other person says something that relates to the first thing they said because they were already thinking of their answer before they spoke or before the other person was done speaking, or to say something off a completely different subject, because I think a lot of people have conversations with themselves.
Yeah, and non sequiturs, having two people going through a conversation and the one's saying one thing and the other is not answering them directly, but like moving down like this unstoppable force towards a completely different point is also very common. I've got a couple slides here on ways that dialogue can become memorable, but we're moving a little slowly, so I'm going to zip through them. But basically, a few things that I noticed when I was looking up the most famous lines of dialogue from movie scripts is a few categories they tended to fall into. One is lines that are like an embodiment of the person who is speaking. So that's the famous Joker line about why so serious. And this longer segment I have from Clueless, which gets at the ditzy Cher was his name, Cher's ditzy personality, but that there's something behind it all, which is sort of endearing, which is why that gets brought up so often as this great example of someone managing to take Emma and put it in Valley Girl, California, and somehow it worked. And another way that a dialogue can get memorable is if it is the culmination of a build, so that people spout the line of dialogue, but it's basically the capstone. And when they say that line of dialogue, they're thinking about all the things that led up to that. And so Clint Eastwood's like, "Do you feel lucky, punk?" is the capstone, because you know that it has been preceded by this long disinquisition on how my Desert Eagle is going to take your head off, or the long apology and like groveling that Tom Cruise does that leads up to "you had me at hello." That's why that line works. And then, of course, Inigo Montoya's famous mantra chant that he does all the way through, so that by the end, you're like, everybody else is staying
Hello,
alone.
my name is Inigo Montoya. I think it's also, as a scriptwriter, interesting to me to look at when a memorable line doesn't fit one of these four categories. People will assign it to a category in a different way. For instance, Hermione is quoted all the time as having said, "When in doubt, go to the library," except Hermione doesn't say that, Ron does, right? Or, "Luke, I am your father." Not a line in that movie at all, and yet it's the one that everybody quotes from wherever it came from, because it's the one that fits the character specific. Like, that's the one that we remember, and it forces it into a category. And as a writer, I have to wonder, when looking back at that script, if they think, crap, I should have given that line to that character.
Or like "Play It Again, Sam," which is like which didn't actually occur in Casablanca, and is like the one that that people remember from Casablanca. Yeah, totally. And then another couple ways in which lines can become memorable is understatement. So, "Toto, I have a feeling we're not in Kansas anymore," because it's pretty obvious they're not by that point, and I made him an offer he couldn't refuse, as when the mob means that they threaten to kill him. Or the big one from Jaws, which gets to the top, which is he takes one look at the shark and says, "You're going to need a bigger boat."
I love that so much.
And like clashing or surreal, the one where you're like, you can sort of believe that it's going on in the story, but it does not seem to fit. And so that the famous dialogue in Pulp Fiction where a couple of mob hitmen are going off to kill people, and in the meanwhile they're talking about what they call quarter pounders in France, where they don't use they use the metric system. And so it's sort of clashing with the rest of it. And so I wanted to come back to Hills Like White Elephants so that we can at least get double value out of having to read these segments of dialogue. And so I already talked about how it works on a technical level. On an emotional level, one of the things you notice is you get to this line where it's really an awful simple operation, Jake. And so I had to omit it because of space requirements, but the entire story, like a page worth of dialogue, has all been the beer is nice and cool. It's lovely, which should be the kiss of death for your story. It's chatting. It's way up on my list of watered down conversation, except there's been a couple of hints that things aren't right. And so building with this chatting and breaking that rule means that all of a sudden when it gets real, you pay attention. And that's a way of moving the dialogue in this sort of rhythm so that you hit that emotional beat. And the way she doesn't respond to him to begin with, she's very silent and he's doing all the talking. And she just sort of lets it come out of him. And occasionally she starts interjecting a few words of her own. And from his responses, you can tell that this guy he doesn't want her to actually respond. He's not looking for a human response. He just wants like absolute agreement and absolution, and that's it. And when she actually says something and says, really, then it's like, oh my gosh. He's like, oh no, everything will be fine. Everything will be fine. And he gets back on his mantra because he can't take it. And then later on, after he's done that enough times, then she starts cutting him off. So that's on the technical level, she's cutting him off. But on an emotional level, this is showing that when you're cutting off another character, when one character is cutting off another character, that's a dialogue tactic in an argument. If the other person who is saying something cannot complete their own words, it's a way of winning an argument. And so when you're in conflict with someone, not letting them finish is a way to sort of move forward and win in it. And this please, that's 6 pleases in a row, which to me sounds very un-Hemingway-esque, but his narrative pushed him to where he had to do this not very Hemingway-ish thing of having this person repeat herself because this guy has driven up the wall. And all of Hemingway's details are pretty banal. So again, this could be the kiss of death. This could make the story less interesting. But when he's talking to her and she's not responding, she's fiddling with things, she's looking at other things, idly pulling at a bead curtain that's nearby, and it just sort of shows that her despair and unhappiness. And his beats are cataloging all these little meaningless details, and it shows his nervousness and agitation. And so even with these fairly banal and boring beats, you can invest them with some emotion. And just a sec. Alrighty. So Katrina has the next exercise for you, and I'll let her lead.
All right. So this is that whole kind of idea of an argument about the dishes is never really about the dishes, right? And it's an exercise that I do a lot, and I might have done the last time I did a dialogue workshop for Roundtable Writers. I can't remember, but But I still like it. And so the idea is to write dialogue between two characters, or a monologue from one character in which they are angry, but you never state why they are angry. You never come right out and say why they are angry. We're doing 8 minutes on this?
Yeah. We're good on time, so we'll for 8 minutes.
Perfect.
Please write a dialogue in which at least one character is angry, but they don't reveal what. And then at the end, we'll try to guess what they were angry about. Or was I not supposed to get that?
No, that's cool. Yeah, when we share, we'll try to guess what they were angry about when we share what we've written.
I will share first.
We.
No, me, I'm moderator. I. I trusted you. Her eyes were bitter gray. Hey, it's not my fault, James kicked the cage. I did what you said, Sid. Just what you said. And nothing more. Sid looked away. What's that supposed to mean? Nothing. God. No! He grabbed her shoulder. Tell me. Her knuckles on his jaw made the satisfying sound of peanuts cracking. He landed on his ass, eyes watering, as she pointed one finger toward the cage. You had one job. You just needed to make sure. At night. Now it was her turn. Tears burned her cheeks. She kicked the cage door closed. It swung shut with a hollow sound.
Don't feed a gremlin after dark.
I have no idea, but it makes me want to hear more.
I think he fed her gremlin after dark.
Or it wasn't watching the animal?
There you go.
Definitely.
That one. I like the gremlin.
Only because it's you, and you know.
Oh.
Anybody else want to share?
I could share. Wait. You said you had a good day at work. Sam said it like a statement. It was fine. Why? Maybe you should say more than it was fine every time you talk about work. What's up with you? Laura glanced at Sam, but he wouldn't take his eyes off the road. He had that look he got when he was pissed about something, and she reached out to touch his leg. Really, honey, she tried. I'm confused. I thought we'd agreed that bringing work into our personal lives didn't help our relationship. And that's as far as I got.
So it's not about the work. Ah.
I think, to be fair, I think that it would probably be impossible to guess with how far I'd gotten. What I was getting at was that she is becoming friends with his ex-wife because they're crossing paths in a work situation, and he doesn't
Nice.
like that.
Yeah. But you can
That's
see
awesome.
that something's going to come up, and he's not going to come out and say it, though.
And it's such a, like, you can really see the value of not coming right out and saying it, and how intriguing it can make a story when you don't make it obvious.
Mm.
And you started moving, like you put them in the car so they were in a place. They weren't just sort of in the white rooms. Much of my stuff gets into white rooms, but I found this helped a little bit to get out of that too. How about you, Lucas?
I'm in a similar boat where I just didn't get enough of mine to make it at all clear what they're angry about. I think I tend to do more of the beats than the dialogue, so maybe it's a different kind of writing style.
I like there are two dialogue related exercises that I do in the editing process. And if I'm writing long form fiction, one of them is to do like a blackout exercise on everything but the dialogue, just to see. And then the other thing I do when I'm writing a script particularly is I will color code all the characters so that I can see if I have like 4 pages where one character is just standing there but hasn't spoken at all. Like on a stage, that can be really awkward. You don't, unless that character has a different purpose on that stage, you don't want them just standing there not speaking. So
And that's the blacking out of various parts of speech works really well in Word because you can just use the highlight function and just highlight in black. And that can give you, it can also help with cadence, I think. I think Tom might have been suggesting that to me because you can look, if you black stuff out by various types of writing, then you can see, or color coded, then you can see the shape of your piece, and you say, wow, mine just looks like gigantic Duplo Lego blocks, right? Or it's like a bunch of Duplo Lego blocks, and then like this tiny little string of very short dialogue, and then back to the Lego blocks, as opposed to something with a nice flow to it, shapeliness.
Yeah, that's the blackout thing is a Kara Hoffman trick that I will steal forever. That I got that from her, and I use it with my students in various ways too. I tell them to go through their papers and black out all the adverbs, for example, because especially freshman comp students, they like those adverbs. So there's all kinds of different ways you can black out a paper to learn a lot about it.
I got one. I want to see if people can guess.
Do it.
Do my one. Yay. Okay. Ruffles is looking a bit lethargic, don't you think? Todd said. Yeah, maybe, Mason answered. No, get down, take a look at her. Look here, under the collar. What? There's something there? Come down and look. I'm in my slacks. Well, if you don't care about the huge lump on his neck. If it were huge, I'd see it from here. Mason gets down to look. Oh, damn, Todd, it's just a bit of chafing. Chafing? I know what chafing is. It isn't dark and scaly, and it doesn't rise up like that. Odd, Mason said. He stood and brushed off the knees of his slacks, but a black tar-like mark on the left knee smeared. Damn it. How long has it been there? I don't know. Well, when was the last time you walked him? Yesterday? You didn't get back until 8 yesterday. Did you walk him in the dark? Then 2 days ago. I don't know. You don't. And you don't know if it was there 2 days ago, or 5, or a week, because it's nothing. It could be anything, and you wouldn't know until I called you from the vet. That's the end.
Are they having relationship problems and one of them's like never around?
You got it.
Yay!
Yep. Todd is the one who's at home more, and Mason is the one who's not around enough. You got it. Yeah, it worked.
Nice work. That was awesome.
Hey, are we at the question and answer time?
Yeah, I think, let me bring up my slides again. Ready? So, yep, we're done. That's it. That was our last exercise. Actually, it wasn't our last exercise because we have bonus exercises that you can do if you're still excited about dialogue after the presentation.
It's true. We had a few.
You guys are my favorite workshop leaders. So before we go, jump straight into the question and answer section. Big round of applause to these guys. Amazing job. So I actually have a question, which is, what is a piece of your least favorite dialogue from something that's very popular, like something that everyone else loves, but you take a look at and it makes everything cringe?
Okay, so I have a mixed. Let me answer that in 2 different ways. Wait a second. Do I have my bag? I don't have my bag here. I was going to say, I'm a huge fan of the show. Big enough that I have a bag from the show that normally holds my knitting, but apparently it's not in this room right now. Chilling Adventures of Sabrina. Alongside Riverdale. They both do the same thing. I was talking to Dan about this the other day. I love both shows. I love any show that pulls from Archie Comics. I'm there for it. I have loved Archie Comics since I was a child. However, you could create a drinking game that got everybody really drunk just off of how often characters say each other's names unnecessarily. Like, for some reason, Archie has to say the name Veronica and Sabrina has to say everybody's name every time she speaks, and it drives me up a wall. Because at first I thought, well, maybe this is a comic book thing, but then I got thinking about it and I was like, no, because you've got limited space on the page of a comic book. And you're not throwing extra words in on a comic book because you're focusing on the images. So I don't know why they all do it, but all those comic book related television shows do it, and I can't stand it. Still love them though. I have a Chilling Adventures of Sabrina bag. I carry it everywhere.
That's fantastic. Yep.
I think mine would probably be a similar sort of thing. The comic book propensity for having their major like bang crash action things going on, and people trying to do this like witty dialogue, but it feels like they're trying too hard so often. They're like there's this kind of delivery like da 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 da. Where they're trying to get in little zingers, and there's no zing in that zinger. I'm unzung. I am unzung by your zingers.
But when
Unsung hero.
somebody like
Fantastic.
intentionally pokes fun at that in a superhero, anything like Thunder Force, the new Melissa McCarthy and Octavia, my brain just froze on her last name, but their new movie, there's a lot of times in that when they have those kind of like lines like that, and it's very much like we're gonna poke fun at this trope of attempting to do zingers because neither of them is coordinated enough to do that.
So it works because it's like they're laughing at themselves.
Yeah, it's like an intentional mocking of like they obviously those writers feel the same way about it you do, so they mock it by
Right.
kind of going overboard with it.
Right.
And then there's other like really the best lines are one of them is in the trailer is Melissa McCarthy's character or Octavia's character says, do not throw that bus, and Melissa McCarthy's character says, I'm gonna throw this bus. And like those moments when it's just them being themselves actually give you that zinger feeling of like, yeah, she's gonna throw the damn bus.
Right.
But then when they try to do zingers, it just falls flat and sounds stupid intentionally.
They have an entire scene of that in an old superhero mocking film, Mystery Men, which is one of my favorites, where Ben Stiller's character is trying to come up, I'm furious, and you're like, wow, that is no, that's bad.
Yeah, I love it when they poke fun at themselves that way, like poke fun at tropes in writing, because I feel like we need to do that.
Yeah. More humor is always good because it can make all the rest of the stuff work.
Well, let's open it up. If anybody else has any little questions here for our workshop leaders, go ahead.
I'll jump in with one. It's actually grammar related. I have this habit, and I found myself doing it in this last exercise, where I want the character to say something, and I want it to be a statement with period, and then I want to put one of those beats in next, but I want it separated by a period. So in this case, it was, you said you had a good day at work, period. And then Sam said it like a statement. So it's not like you said you had a good day at work, comma, Sam said, period. Is that allowed? Is it not? Is it allowed, but I shouldn't be using it all the time? I always wonder that.
I mean, technically, by like the strictest rules of punctuation, no. But I think in that case, I would give you an A+ in my class. Because it's so intentional. I think it's okay to break the rules when it's intentional. That being said, I write scripts and I rarely use punctuation at all. So in my own writing, because if you use punctuation in a script, actors overemphasize the punctuation a lot of times. So I tend to leave it out completely in a lot of my work. But yeah, I think so. What do you think, Dan?
If I saw it on the page, I'm an editor in my Pays the Bill job too, and if I saw it on the page, I could say better. I'm trying to find it in my head, but there are definitely times when, if you look here on the question mark and exclamation point section at the middle here, there's like, don't give your main character all your best lines. exclamation point, and then theoretically it should be a capital letter after that. But it's not supposed to be, and so there are times when you can put in like a period. You can break things up a little bit differently, but I'm not sure that's getting at what you're saying, because I need to see it in front of me. Sorry.
I totally get that. I'm really visual too.
Oh yeah, put it in the text. Put it in the text of
Yeah.
in the chat. That's what you should do. And while you're doing that, I can go on here to the end. Oh, come on, you're not gonna make me do that. Just a sec. Flying through this presentation. Okay, so at the end we have 6 or 7 exercises. They're just exercise ideas based on some of the stuff we've talked about, for if you'd like to do more exercisey stuff that might get you coming at dialogue from maybe a slightly different angle than you have been before.
Yeah, see, I think that works with the period.
Yeah. Oh, no,
Because
that
it's
doesn't
like,
work. Yeah.
It's not Sam said, it's Sam said it like it was a statement.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
That's it. Sounds good.
yeah, I totally think that works.
Yeah.
Okay. Cool.
I also
Thank
really-
you.
I really like it when characters say dialogue and there isn't the so-and-so said as much as possible. I think sometimes you need it for clarity when it gets back and forth too much.
Right.
One of my favorite short stories ever is They're Made of Meat,
Yes.
which is entirely in dialogue, and there's no, we read it in one of our play reading group nights, because it reads like a play that's been done as a podcast, and it's been done as YouTube videos, and it's been done all over the place. But there's no, like, you don't even know who these characters are. Literally, the only thing you know about them is they can't be human and they're not made of meat, because they're baffled by the concept that anyone else is made of meat, and that's
Right,
it.
right.
And I love that.
So
Like I said, I like Shakespeare. I like to not have all that. I like to hand that to a director and let them play with it.
That adds a question onto another question I have when you brought up humor. But I have this, I don't know if this is a personal thing, like when I see that line like the he said, she said, yada yada said tag, all the other writers I've talked to, they're like, oh, just you put it in however much you want because the reader will just skip over it subconsciously. And like I can't stand reading that over and over again. So I almost never use it in my own writing if I can get away with it. Is that just like a me thing?
No,
Other
I'm
people have
totally-
a similar.
I do skip over it, and if there's too much of it to skip over, I get annoyed. Like if it's every single line, I will get annoyed. A lot of times when it's every single line, you start sounding like C-Spot Run, Dick and Jane. Like it gets to be too much if it's just he said, she said, he said. Like it's, then I feel like I'm being read to by a 4-year-old. So
yeah, I would say it probably maybe hitting you the same way it would hit me is that you start, your brain is this pattern matching thing. So if you're reading sentences that are the same length over and over again, either consciously or at least unconsciously, you're going to start to feel that something's a little bit off because you're feeling a pattern where there shouldn't be a pattern. If you see dialogue tags every line, oh, for sure. At least put in like a couple of exchanges in the middle of it where it's not, where you don't have to tag it, or put in something that like what Catherine did, which is perfectly fine, and gets you away from actually tagging.
I think that's what I usually end up doing. Is one of the reasons I think now that I put so many beats in there, like or little exposition clips, like you were talking about, is because I hate saying the character said. So I'm like, well, what if I just did this instead that sort of hinted who's talking in it? I don't know if that's like something else I'll have to keep an eye on, or if that breaks up flow as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's sometimes problems that appear to be problems of tagging are really just the symptoms of a bigger problem I think, where you have characters who are too much alike. And so if either of your characters could say a line of dialogue, you got to start thinking about, okay, why are these characters? Maybe I need to make these a little bit different. And then if they're strongly characterized, I mean, even if you don't have to go to caricature to get that to work, but sometimes these things that appear to be these micro level tagging things are more a macro level, like an earlier and higher level characterization thing. Do you find that, Katrina?
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah, definitely.
Okay. I had a question about humor as well, which I often struggle with in my writing. And I've been trying to read like Terry Pratchett, Douglas Adams, sort of like classic humor writers and try to figure out how they do it. And to
Right.
me, it seems like it's mostly in that narrative voice, that very particular sort of approach their narrator has to making fun of everything around them. And it's delightful, but then sometimes I want to like root the comedy in the characters and in their dialogue. And I find it's super hard to time that because you can't really control how the reader is reading it. It's not like they're speaking it out loud. So I don't know if they're like tricks to get around that or ways you can sort of fake timing or something.
That's you, Dan. Our right place. Mine are all
Yeah.
the time.
That's hard. Do you mean in speculative stories specifically, or humor more generally?
I guess in general, I write speculative mostly, so I don't know if is there a difference?
Well, yeah, because so you mentioned Terry Pratchett and Douglas Adams, and that's hard because both of those guys are British humor focused on this really strong narrative voice, and there are other ways to do it. That's what you need is more examples of people writing humorous speculative stories. Or what you can do is you can go to you can do one of two things. One, read a whole bunch of like periodicals, Lightspeed, Clark's World, Magazine of Fantasy and Science Fiction, Strange Horizons, basically short stories, and just flip through for the funny ones and see how speculative writers are doing it, or go to classics of humorous fiction, like David Sedaris kind of thing, or I mean anywhere, George Saunders, and then see how people in different genres are doing humor. Because if you don't want to have a strong narrative voice, then and you're having trouble with the humor, you need to find models. Those guys just happen to have the same model. But there are other ways of doing it. I've seen all sorts of stuff.
If you want to, you're talking about like making your characters have the humor, like the voice of the characters being the funny thing.
Right.
So maybe this isn't. Yeah. So maybe this is a question for me to answer, because my answer would be read plays. Because then you've only got the character's voice, and read that They're Made of Meat story. Because it's freaking hilarious, and all it is dialogue. So you want to get the voice of a funny character out.
It was sort of the other angle I did, like like sort of spoken or like stand-up comedy or Oscar Wilde stuff sometimes. And I'd be like, well, maybe we can just get more dialogue out of it. But then that sort of loops back around to the question of like, that is now a play, and they're not writing it the same way I'm writing it, and then the timing is still off. And it's like that's why I ask about the timing. It's just sort of the trick I run into a lot.
Yeah, read They're Made of Meat, because it's actually a short story. Just happens to be told in dialogue.
But it's all dialogue.
Yeah, it reminds me of another funny speculative story, the short one by Oliver Buckram. And it was just it was practically flash. And something about it really hit me. But the title is fantastic. It's something along the lines of half a dialogue heard while inside a sentence.
Oh, yeah.
It is hilarious.
Yeah.
And it's so perfect. And it is half of a dialogue heard from inside a sentient slug. But it's another thing. It's got the same sort of vibe as they're made of meat. It's all dialogue, and so there's none of this authorial. It's the absolute opposite of the Pratchett-heavy authorial intrusion.
Thanks for bringing the topic of humor up, Lucas, because I realize I am not a very humorous person in real life. Like, and other people's jokes tend to go over my head, and I would love to get better at putting it into my writing. And so this conversation makes me want to just like do a little like study on humor for myself, so I can start to catch it more often and see, well, how are they doing it? Why is it humorous?
That's sort of what I've been trying to do last semester. This MF I was doing, because I kind of have the opposite problem. Like I tend to be pretty funny in real life, especially like with friend groups that I know how to like joke around with. But when I try to recreate that in the sort of sterile, harsh environment of the writing, where it's like there's no one to bounce off of, what do I do now? I don't know. So I don't know. That's why I think the characters, like having characters that bounce off each other, seemed like the solution. But then the timing was off, and it's a mess.
I tend to write comedy without realizing I'm writing comedy. And it wasn't until I think it was Tom Koash first that said something about me being a comedy writer, and I was like, I am? Oh.
Yeah.
But I write, because I write really dark things, I write a lot about death. Like almost everything I write has somebody who's died or some tragic situation, usually a parent who's died. I write a lot about death, but I come at it from a really kind of absurdist angle where mirrors talk to girls, and sometimes those things happen. Just freaky things happen, and I think that adds in the comedy without me even thinking about it. Like, because I write a lot of magical realism and a lot of like my first published story was a short story about domestic violence, but it was domestic violence told through talking fruit. So the children being abused in this short story were clementines, and the best friend telling her that she needed to get away from this guy was visualizing her as a watermelon, and like as a talking watermelon. So it came across. It's funny, but it's about domestic violence.
You gotta lean into the weird. That's interesting.
And that was like the first or second piece I ever published. Actually, it was the second. I think the first piece I published was about zombies, but
that'll do it.
Also funny.
Yeah, I'm so excited to see. I'm sure it'll come a special humor, one of these pop-ups at in Roundtable will definitely be coming up, I'm sure.
That seems like a very good idea. So be careful though, because you're just going to volunteer yourselves again for another one.
Yeah, I can't host that one. Sorry.
I don't know. I mean, that was funny just now. So
it's not written. It's not scripted. Oh no.
Well, let's see here. If anyone else has anything else they want to ask our workshop leaders. All right, in that case, huge round of applause for these guys. You are both my favorite people. This was a treat.
He says that to me every Monday. Don't let it go to your head. Anyway.
I have a lot of favorite people.
This is good. This is good.
Currently,
it's like my 6-year-old son. It's like, this is my favorite, and this is also my favorite, and all of these are my favorites.
Yeah, I got a lot in common with 6-year-old. Apparently, it's this good. Oh, wonderful! This was a treat. I can't wait to be able to put it up on our YouTube and have more people learn from the wisdom